Hello and welcome back to Movie Husbands. This is our top 10 films of 2024. So we're here, another year,
We're back.
another
Yes.
list of our top 10 films of the year.
I look forward to this every year because we do not know each other's top 10s. We really have no idea what the other person is doing. So I look forward to this every year because I genuinely don't know like your ranking of things.
I love the
forward to it.
surprises.
This is where we become a react channel for like a hot minute and then we go back to doing our normal thing.
All right, so usually before we start our lists, we go into our honorable mentions. It's the list of films that we wish could make our lists, but alas could not because we could only choose 10. So do you want to get started with your honorable mentions?
Yes, I can do that. I will say that my honorable mentions is really, really long because I think in a sense this year there were so many movies that I wish could make my top 10, but interestingly enough, and maybe we'll get there when we talk about it, is I had trouble feeling like my number one was really my number one. Last year, I had two films that were vying for my number one that I'm like, these are clearly movies I'm going to remember forever. This year, there was a lot of great films, but not a lot of absolutely spellbinding films.
Rocked you to your core.
In my opinion.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, this is obviously just our opinion, but I think there were a lot of B pluses and A minuses and maybe not a lot of A's this year for me personally. So it actually means that I have quite a bit of honorable mentions. So I will start. Queer, Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, Good One, Challengers, The First Omen, Between the Temples, Close Your Eyes, Rebel Ridge, The Substance, Seed of the Sacred Fig, A Different Man, The Beast, Red Rooms, His Three Daughters, All We Imagine Is Light, and Anora.
Oh, wow. I thought for sure that The Substance was going to end up on your list.
Oh, really? No, I love The
Yeah.
Substance, but I don't know. I haven't felt compelled. I've watched it twice. I haven't felt compelled to go back to it a third time. I think it's wonderful. I think Demi Moore deserves an Oscar.
I love that Between the Temples made your honorable mentions list.
It's a great movie.
I know.
It's really a lot of fun, and actually, it's gotten some awards recognition. Not really like big mainstream awards, but some critics groups have come out for it with screenplay nominations and supporting actress nominations. I think that movie is like conspicuously great.
Yeah, I agree. It also made my honorable mentions list, so I just wanted to point that out because it was a really fun movie.
I had the most trouble not fitting All We Imagine Is Light and Anora into
Yes,
my top 10.
I actually am the same way. I did not put Nora or All We Imagine As Light in my top 10, but they were very close.
Yep.
So to add to that, I'm going to put Sing Sing, Inside Out 2, Furiosa, Civil War, Hard Truths, Flow, A Complete Unknown, I Saw the TV Glow, Thelma, and Nickel Boys. Oh, and Evil Does Not Exist.
Nickel Boys should be in your top 10.
I'm sorry, it's not.
Oh,
It didn't make it.
All right.
I'm sorry to disappoint.
There was something else in there that I clocked it too early. And I don't
Oh,
remember.
okay. So do we want to begin?
My number 10 is A Complete Unknown, which I think is a completely me pick. I say this every year with our top 10s, but I think that top 10s are basically movies that are as good as one another, and you just order them basically based off what you love in film. It's hard for me to say that like any of these films is better than the other, and frankly that any of these films are better than some of the films in my honorable mentions, but A Complete Unknown, if anyone watched our review, connected with me so deeply that I'm just going to be watching for the rest of my life probably. It just feels like such a comfort watch. It feels like something that understood the mythos and the understanding of Bob Dylan so well. Seeing his music put on display in this way and seeing it replicated with such soulfulness, it felt really, really great to see as a Bob Dylan fan. So I actually wish that I could have put this higher, but I'm still wrestling with that whole thing I talked about, that maybe the film is a bit of a hollow exercise. All things considered, it's my number 10 because I think it's fairly good as a film, and I also think that I just love it deeply, and it's a me movie.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that movie. It was a lot of fun. I will say that in my list, I did wrestle with my creative judgment of a film plus how I felt about it. So maybe where something ends up on a list, I would technically put it higher for the technical craft of the film.
I was
if had to
actually
critically review it, but
this is what I meant to say with your honorable mentions. I was very, very worried that Inside Out would be like number 2 or something, and it's on your honorable mentions.
what the heck?
So I feel better.
Wow, that is insulting.
Is it? You
Yes.
love that movie.
I do love that movie.
Yeah,
so
I don't
it
know.
would be insulting to think that, if it was
I
number
don't
2,
think
that
so.
would be a
'Cause
bad
it's not
thing.
like a bad movie, but like I don't know. It's not
You would have been
number-
upset if it was number 2.
I wouldn't have been upset, but it's not your number 2, so clearly something stopped you from putting it that high.
But going from there, my number 10 is Janet Planet. I love this film. We saw it recently and we did not get a chance to review it on the channel, so it was a great time to talk about it briefly. But it's a film that takes an observational look at a single mother and her 11-year-old daughter that are living in a cabin in rural Massachusetts. It's really such a wonderful exploration of their relationship through these 3 individual stories of these people that come into their lives. lives and live in this cabin during the summer. And I found it to be one of those films where the mundanity of life leads to these bigger questions over time and things slowly reveal themselves, such as how we end up on certain paths within our lives or the things that we carry with us. But I found it to be just such a lived in film that has all the nostalgia and humor of its time period. It's one of those movies where all these little details matter so much, down to this magazine cover that's tacked onto a wall and eventually is ripped off, leaving this little shard of paper behind. And then all of a sudden, scenes down the line, you see this little shard of paper turn up again. But it's something that you would just, pass over or not, you would overlook. And this film moves in such a slow, steady pace. I was completely engaged with it and enthralled by it, that I just noticed all these little things. So it's one of those movies that as it ends, there's more questions and conversations to be had as you think about it.
Yeah, this will be on my list and not yet. So I will talk about it when it comes up. My number 9 is Nickel Boys. I think all things considered, it's just a completely original piece of work in terms of the way it thinks about subjectivity, the way that it thinks about empathy, and it uses the camera almost as a weapon to talk about those things with its audience. It's extraordinary in these ways that it occupies your mind with these terrific images, and the way that it uses camera to mimic subjectivity. Even I know we talked about this in a review, but the way that it uses focus and the way that you would open your eyes or focus your eyes, it is so well thought out, and it is so interesting the way that it's using this technique. And I think even more so than a lot of films we talk about, its technique is always in service of its ideas, which is extremely important. I think it loses itself somewhat in the middle, and that's the only reason it's not higher. And I want to see it again just to see maybe it didn't lose itself in the middle. Maybe I'll be more engulfed in the whole atmosphere of this the second time I watch it. But it's too good not to be on my list. But I have a suspicion. I was rewatching Nope recently, and a while ago, and I know that at some point we're going to do movies we got wrong, but a movie I got wrong is Nope, which is one of the best movies of the past 10 years. And I'm concerned that Nickel Boys could be one of those that should be a lot higher. But anyway, right now it's number 9.
I clocked you in our Nope review, by the way.
You did. I was wrong. I was very wrong on Nope. I liked Nope, and I didn't love Nope, and I should have loved Nope from the first second I saw it.
That being said, I really did love Nickel Boys. To be honest, if I had to, I was wrestling with 9 and 10, and 9 and 10 are pretty much on the same level as Nickel Boys, Anora, and Evil Does Not Exist for me. So if that means anything, they're so close to the list that I just had to pick 2, whatever. This thing is so stupid that we do this to ourselves. Anyways, my number 9 is A Real Pain. It was one of the most funny and heartwarming movies this year for me. Kieran Culkin and Jesse Eisenberg play these 2 cousins going on a trip at their late grandmother's request after she has passed on, to visit her childhood home in Poland. But it's through this trip that we get to see them reconnecting, but also these deep-rooted issues that have developed as they've gotten older and become adults. So they have to wrestle with these things in a way that I thought was just illuminating. It tells you about your life growing up and how you lose parts of yourself as you leave your childhood behind. There's just so many things about that relationship that was beautiful and funny and heartwarming and endearing. And I'm just saying words that sound almost the same. Heartwarming and endearing are pretty much the same thing. But
yeah,
it just has all these things, all these emotional beats that really resonate and fall together very nicely.
Yeah, it harkens back to the great independent films of the early 2000s, a little bit bittersweet and a little bit sad and a little bit funny and a little bit touching, kind of all at once. It's a quick 90 minutes and you learned a little about yourself and you're out of the theater. It's actually a bit of an oversight. This should have been on my honorable mentions. It is not on my list.
Oh, okay.
It's a really great film that I look forward to watching again. It's actually going on Hulu next weekend. By the time this is up, actually, it will probably be on Hulu, so definitely check it out.
Oh, I can't wait to see it again.
Yeah. My number 8 is Evil Does Not Exist, which is a movie that was on your honorable mentions. We have a review of this out, so I won't talk about it too much, but it's just an utterly beguiling, mysterious, really strange eco horror thriller thing. I don't really know what this movie is, but it's this puzzle with endless layers, and they just continually occupy my mind. It has this meaning that's hidden just below the surface. You can feel that this film is an extended metaphor, an extended allegory about our relationship to the climate. It's not those things in a way that's too obscure or too difficult to decipher. You feel you're just on the cusp of understanding totally what it's about, but at the same time, the more you think about it, the more meaning is unlocked. We watched this pretty early in the year, and I just haven't stopped thinking about it. I think it is just a very, very good film from Hamaguchi. It's so utterly different from the humanist, almost like Mike Lee-esque dramas that he made before that I'm very curious where he's going to go as a filmmaker. But anyway, this is like a monstrous, insane step forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I absolutely adore this film. It's a film about nature and the rules that make nature, like our behavior, animal behavior, but how we're still connected to all those things, even though we've progressed as, people. We have this consciousness and we build all these things, but there's still this grounding nature to the film that reminds you, like, yeah, we're all just animals in the end. And we all have to succumb to this the rules of nature that just exist naturally in our world. And I love how the film is a reminder of all those things.
Number 8.
Oh, it's my turn. Yes, my number 8 is Problemista. I am very excited to say this is one of my personal favorites of the year. I would have put it higher if it weren't for other films that I just thought had more purpose.
Yeah, this is a totally you movie, though. And I don't say that in any like disparaging way. I think this film is really great, but I totally understand why you connected with it so much.
Absolutely, completely. It's a movie about really finding your voice through a person who doesn't really know how to stop talking at all. Tilda Swinton makes it.
Did you find that relatable in any way?
It's so relatable. Tilda Swinton makes this absolutely unforgettable character who is insufferably assertive and demanding. Julio Torres makes a character that is so relatable to those who dream big but lack a little of the assertiveness to get there. And together they make this so unlikely, humorous pair that feeds off one another so well in the film, but one where they find so much understanding within themselves and each other. It was just a beautiful film. I loved it. I cried. I laughed.
Yeah, and it has such a natural wonder about the world and such like a natural wonder about how we connect with one another, and it's given to just these fantasies of whimsy.
Yeah, I was going to say it's very whimsical.
Yeah, it's a lovely film. So my number 7 is a film called Last Summer, which I know that you haven't seen. This movie is a bit confusing because it starts out as this kind of nice family drama, like French drama in the countryside. There's like innumerable films like this. And then it turns really rather ugly when a stepmother who's probably in her 50s starts a relationship with her stepson, which he's like 17 years old. That's scandalous in its own way, but the way that the film evolves, it has a final hour that is just like utterly nasty and like totally weaponized denial and just ugly. I actually feel like the film is a lot better for going to the places that it goes. It's really rare that I felt as icky in this film. It's complex, it's humane, it's unnerving, and especially it's very, very provocative. So it's directed by Catherine Breillat, and I've actually watched some of her films. They're all playing on the Criterion Channel if anybody's interested, but I watched some of her films since seeing this film, and she's, I want to say in her 60s or 70s, so she's made a bunch of films, even dating back to the 70s, and she is a very, very transgressive and provocative filmmaker. Her films are always really interesting. I don't think they're always as complex as this film is. This is truly one of her best films, and I've enjoyed all of her films because of how transgressive they are. They're just subject matter that you don't normally see in films. But this one, I think, is so delicately handled, even when it turns really ugly. It's so insightful and so nasty about human nature that I just can't help but put it on my list. I think it's really, really good.
Awesome. And moving from there, what? No, I think that's awesome. It sounds like a you film. Yeah, provocative and nasty. It sounds like something you would enjoy thoroughly. Speaking of maybe slightly much more less provocative, but still provocative nonetheless, and a little bit nasty in a sexual sense, I'm going with Challengers for number 7. This is one of those absolutely vibey movies that has grown in reflection for me. I think I originally gave it a B+, and I want to amend that to an A- because this is a film that's just stuck with me, and we saw this at the beginning, roughly the beginning of the year, a few months into the year. So to have that staying power that the film does for me in my mind is just such a huge benefit to it. It's such a sexy and wild ride with all this raw energy. And the score by Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor is in perfect step with this movie. And I also want to give you a little shout out because you gave me the vinyl of this soundtrack for Christmas. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. It is great.
Yeah.
It's really great.
It's definitely one of those movies that's on here because it was just so much fun for me.
It was great seeing it in a theater, and it really holds up. Did you get a chance to rewatch this?
No, not yet.
Yeah, it's actually a lot of fun. I rewatched it a couple days ago. My number 6 is La Chimera. It's a film I can't really explain why it's so good. It feels magical and ephemeral, and it feels as if there's like some mystical element that's just at the margins of the story at all times. Great Josh O'Connor performance. And it has this quiet, like meandering splendor and wonder about the world at large that I just found really like engaging. So I think the film deals with loss in a really interesting way too. I don't know that the end of the film, I'm not sure if it's totally a happy ending or a sad ending or bittersweet, somewhere in the middle, but the way that Josh O'Connor is able to rectify the way that he thinks about loss and what he's searching for throughout the film, I actually found really oddly touching. And the way that the film ends is almost in like a spiritual lens that feels like it's coming to fruition in a way that was at the margins for a variety or for most of the film's runtime. I just really liked it. It's a film that, again, I can't totally explain why it works, and I can't totally explain why I was so engaged with what it was doing, but I've seen it twice now. I watched it once by myself. I watched it once with you, and I just find it so interesting and so magical. I think it's a great film.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing that separates me from this film is the surrealness of it, and that's a problem I have with a lot of movies that are very surreal and I can't really make heads or tails of. I mean, we could list a whole bunch of them. One thing I did really like about this film that I will mention is its conversation around archaeology in a way, and the way that we bury things in the ground and people dig them up, and whether those things should be left to be or not. I find that conversation very interesting. I don't want to get too deep into it in case anybody hasn't seen it, but
no, I know what you mean.
There's a conversation about like maybe we should just leave those things there.
Yeah, I saw this really funny meme the other day that was Indiana Jones, and he was saying it belongs in a museum. And then I forget the character's name, but the woman in Razor the Lost Ark is like, in the country that it's from, right? And then it's just him looking and then her looking. Anyway, I feel like that is definitely a part of this film.
There's a particular scene where something happens to one of the objects. It gets broken.
Yes.
And I found this to just be devastating because it's such a beautiful piece. It talks about like the black market of like antiquities. That conversation is something I really, really appreciate about the film.
Yeah, and there's some understanding of that too, where they say, there's a line that keeps coming up about like you were never made for human eyes.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yeah. You're good at remember those little details. Anyways, my number 6 is Wicked. Hate on me all you want. You're probably upset that I made it as high as it did on the list.
I'm so glad you don't follow me on Twitter. I have been raging against Wicked on Twitter. Nobody follows me.
This is why I left Twitter.
Nobody will find me on Twitter.
There's a cesspool.
My name isn't. It is a.
And you're adding to the
it's
cesspool.
It's where I can be a cesspool towards Wicked.
Oh my gosh. Anyways, hate on me all you want. I really love this movie.
Wicked is fine.
It was an absolute blast for me. The songs are stuck in my head. There's so much creativity in the choreography. The set design is so practical and grounded and grand. The performances by Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande are so amazing. I mean, they did such a wonderful job. The ability to sing all these scenes live while they're moving and doing all this choreography, they were just absolutely intoxicating. Don't make fun of me. Don't make fun of me. I love it.
That's fine. It's your complete unknown. I get it. I have a prediction. I think Wicked 2 is going to suck. I do. I'm not saying Wicked 1 is bad, but the more I read about Wicked 2, like, oh, we want Ariana Grande to be nominated for another Oscar, so we gave her more songs. And it's like this whole new side of Glinda. I don't know. I think it's going to suck. I'm just putting it out there. Could be wrong. Could be wrong.
We are going to pull this back up in our Wicked 2 review. When we
you should. No, we totally should.
We will.
We'll review Wicked 2, and we'll see if I'm wrong. I'm happy to be wrong. My number 5 is a good film called No Other Land. I actually struggled with not putting this higher. I think it's an extraordinary film. Talking about it in film terms feels almost like a pejorative, or it feels like it's minimizing it in some way, whereas really this is just a piece of journalism, things about happening in the West Bank, and being a witness with the camera, and what that means. We saw this film at the New York Film Festival. That was back in September, and this film is still not distributed. It is like on anyone who has good taste. This is on their top 10 list of the year.
Internationally, it's been distributed by so many different
probably
every country.
Probably very, very good chance it gets nominated at the Oscars for Best Documentary. It's crazy that nobody's touching this movie because it is so full of humanism and it's so beautiful, even amidst like so much tragedy. Is not manipulative in any sense. It is a film that is just there to witness, and it's really, really good and really affecting. If my list was only about films that are the most important films to see, this would be number 1, which is hyper annoying because this is probably the hardest film to see that's on my whole darn list.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't need to keep talking about it. We have a review of it. It's a great film. If it plays anywhere near you, go see it.
I will actually be talking about it shortly. So we'll get to that soon. But for now, my number 5 is The Brutalist. And
this is actually my number 4.
Oh,
so we
okay.
can talk about it in tandem.
We can talk about it in tandem. What an absolutely towering achievement in cinema it is this year. The Brutalist is absolutely meticulously crafted in its story of the immigrant experience. It's one of those films of the year that had it absolutely all down, from its characterizations, the score, the set design. All of these pieces and elements are in conversation with one another. Its themes are so rich and precise. We have a really deep review, so I'm not going to add too much more than that beyond what you have to say. But I do recommend watching that review because I think we go, much deeper into the film, and there's a lot of little things to talk about.
Definitely. I think there's a pretty good argument that says this should be my number one film of the year. Just in terms of achievement, there was a lot that was made about like how this film is monumental and everybody's calling it monumental. It is. It's the film achievement of the year in terms of technical ability, in terms of making things on a small budget, all of that stuff. There's no denying how brilliant it is, how gorgeously executed it is. I'm curious about its staying power. As truly extraordinary as it is as a movie, it's really easy to put your finger on, which a lot of the movies that I like a little bit better this year are movies that are tough to put your finger on and maybe stay in your mind in different ways. But I'm not going to be able to say anything bad about this movie. This movie is terrific.
So going on to number 4 is a film that I thought would be higher on your list, actually, and ended up being an honorable mention, and that's His Three Daughters. His Three Daughters is a beautiful and very difficult portrait of grief and the connection we share in the midst of someone's passing. How we navigate this grief collectively and also on our own is such a universal story, but this film is, I think, one of the more realistic representations and visualizations I've seen of that story between the performance of Carrie Coon, Natasha Lyonne, Elizabeth Olsen. They do such a wonderful job crafting these such distinct characters that have all these interactions with one another that both illuminate their connection to each other and who they are as individuals. So it's just a beautifully crafted film. It's one of those films that if you haven't seen it, it just takes place in one apartment for the most part. And it's just all these conversations and people on top of each other dealing with their father that's passing. On a separate note, this film holds a place in both of our hearts in some regard because you lost your father this year. A few months before that, we lost my grandfather, both who we had really nice connections with. So I think this film was just so relatable for the experience of dealing with grief, the things we learn about each other while grief is happening.
Totally.
There's just so much packed into this movie, and I really loved it.
I love this movie too, actually, and I watched it like 4 or 5 months after my dad died, and I found it like very, very healing. It was a movie that like I saw the things I was going through replicated on screen in a very unique way, and I think one of the only reasons it wasn't on my list was just because I had a lot of indie dramas that were well written on my list that if I was looking at all of them, this one just didn't make the cut. Well, if it's any consolation, this is the most I've cried during a movie this year.
Yes. I feel bad. I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to be laughing.
Yeah, no, I know. No, I know.
Bluntly said it was funny.
I watched this movie 3 times. The first time I was like blown away by it, cried. The second time I really liked it. The third time I really liked it too, but it was enough on a rewatch value level that it was easy to prioritize the other movies it was in competition with, if that makes sense. Maybe it's messed up of me that this movie did what art is supposed to do. It helped me heal from something, and it's not on my list, but it's a great film. So my number 3 is Hard Truths. Really, really like what Mike Leigh does. Seeing this film reminded me of how unique he is as a writer and a director and how so few people are on his level in terms of what he's looking to do, which is just truly hold a mirror to humanity. It's not about story structure. It's not about this person changes, this person doesn't change, this person learns something. It's really just let's observe human nature. This is a nature documentary about people and what can we learn from it. As a small scale character drama, like it has so much to say about happiness and about the idea that hurt people hurt people. This is a portrait of a deeply, deeply unhappy person who has reasons for being unhappy that aren't totally available to the audience all the time, that are hinted at. But it's a challenge of your empathy at times and how much you're willing to give this person, I don't want to say credit, but give this person empathy for how they're dealing with their lives and how they ended up here. I really admire how this film is just begging for a release of tension that it chooses not to give you. Leigh has a very long career of making great films like this, and I hope he continues to make them. And
Marianne Jean-Baptiste is like one of the best performances of the year in this film. Her not being nominated for a Golden Globe was a crime, and if she does not get nominated at the Oscars, I will be throwing a hissy fit on this channel in a couple weeks' time.
All right.
I'm just putting that out there.
No, I know. I mean, I'll be throwing a hissy fit too.
So going from there, my number 3 is No Other Land. It's an absolutely must-see documentary that is not getting distribution anywhere. So how can you see something, a must-see movie that isn't being shown? Anyways, it's a documentary about the Israeli occupation in the West Bank. We've talked about it on our channel if you haven't seen that review yet. The documentary follows Basil and Yuval, a Palestinian and an Israeli respectively, who join forces to document and expose the slow destruction of homes in Basil's village, Masafer Yatta, And I just love how this film so authentically builds a narrative around Israeli actions in the region. It's a film that's, as you put in our review, it's absolutely impossible to argue with or look away from. The film is harrowing and, as you mentioned, just filled with so much humanity. And it's an absolute travesty, again, that this film hasn't picked up for distribution when it's been picked up all over the world.
As of a couple days ago, Brady Corbet, I don't know, did you see this?
No.
Brady Corbet, he won Best Director for the New York Film Critics, so they had their gala the other day, and he give a little speech, and at the end of it, he said it's time to pick up No Other Land. It's crazy, like the amount of like very, very important people in the film industry who are saying pick this movie up, and it's still not being picked up. David Ehrlich, who is the IndieWire film critic, one of my favorite film critics, he makes a montage every year of his favorite films of the year, and every year he partners with a director who is on his list for a charity that they're like. So he partnered with Basil this year. They're supporting the Palestine Red Crescent Society. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out IndieWire, check out David Ehrlich's page on Twitter or any of his pages. You could donate there, and that's in correspondence with No Other Land.
That also reminds me, I'm pretty sure somebody commented on a review. I did not get a chance to look into this, but the commenter had said that Michael Moore is showing the movie in certain places in theaters.
I also read that not a distributor, but some sort of like exhibitionist or some sort of exhibitor or something picked it up that's showing select screenings around the country.
Okay.
So if you search No Other Land, you may be able to find a screening near you. I hope it wins an Oscar, because then unfortunately
You can't avoid it. Yeah.
Yeah, it will pick up distribution in 2 seconds if it wins an Oscar. But anyway.
Ridiculous.
My number 2 is Do Not Expect Too Much from the End of the World.
Oh, okay.
Which is my number 1 movie from halfway through the year.
Yeah.
This movie, gosh, I love this movie. So the reason it's so high up on my list is because it's just what I feel. It's a movie that has completely given up on life, the gig economy, and like bullshit corporations, and it knows the world is over. That's why it's called that. That's why it's called Do Not Expect Too Much from the End of the World, because it's just this tired gasp that is so funny, but at the same time so mordantly funny. It's directed by Radu Jude, who is becoming not only one of my favorite filmmakers, but one of my favorite Romanian filmmakers, in addition to Christian Manju, another amazing Romanian filmmaker. But his sense of humor is so scathing and so insane. And I really give him a lot of credit for like how disturbing this film is in terms of its sense of humor. But at the same time, considering how this year turned out with the election and everything, like this is a movie that I took a lot of comfort in, because the only thing to do right now is just laugh at how everything is going up in flames. And that's what this movie is about. I would encourage everybody to check it out. It's on Mubi. They're distributing it. So if you want to do a free trial, it's on Mubi, and it's a wonderful film.
Going from there, my number 2 is Memoir of a Snail.
Lovely
It's
film.
definitely one of Maddie films. So Memoir of a Snail is a claymation tragic comedy, if you're not familiar. It follows twins Grace and Gilbert, who are separated after their parents' deaths. More than that, it's about the weight that piles on someone's mental health after experiencing tragedy upon tragedy. How over time, one can become so beat up that our dreams and our future seem so unreachable. But in that pain, there is hope in our connection with others, those like the character of Pinky, that help us see that there are new perspectives on life. I related so hard to this movie, the way that death and losing loved ones can make us retreat into our own shells, or the way that oppressive religious folks can inhibit you from being your true self. But it's also a film that's about the escaping from those shells and a newly embracing of life. And it manages to be so many things: hilarious, heartbreaking, heartwarming. I absolutely love this movie. It completely broke me and pieced me back together all in 90 minutes. And I can't say that for many films this year.
I love Adam Elliott. He doesn't make movies very often. His prior feature-length film was a movie called Mary and Max that I really, really liked. That's from 2009. Films that are stop motion, they take a really long time to make. So I think that is some of it. But we should watch Mary and Max sometime. I watched it like within the past year, and I was really, really touched by it. But I think Memoir of a Snail is just great. My number 1.
I don't even know what it is.
It's Janet Planet.
Oh my gosh, you hadn't mentioned that. Wow.
Yeah, my number 1 is Janet Planet. I was just so much on this film's wavelength. It's such a distinct portrait of seeing your parent as a person for the first time. You know, your world, the person you look up to, the person that tells you all the truths all the time. When you're coming into adolescence, when you're 11 or 12 years old, especially like my parents separated around that time, kind of similar to the mom in Janet Planet. Like my mom was looking for a new way to live her life. She was looking to, like, I had lived my life this way for 20 something years, and now I have to find a new way of being. And that is kind of imperfect. You know, it's kind of in a way that like being a teenager again, it's like you're looking for different identities and you're looking for different ways to live your life that may not always mesh with with your life and like the way that your life is conducting itself. So Janet Planet, I feel like, has this very unique time in someone's life where you start to see your parents in that way and you start to see them as flawed, you start to see them as humans, you start to see them as people that aren't so different from what you're going to become. And maybe that you can't exactly put your finger on what's wrong, but you know that something is not quite right here. Something is not as secure as it was a couple of years ago. I think that Janet Planet is a film that really lives in metaphors. Like, it has an extraordinary ending where the mother is dancing, like line dancing from person to person to person, and her daughter is looking on kind of in horror. And you're like, what is this all about? The way I interpreted that is just some idea of jumping from person to person, philosophy to philosophy, trying to find meaning and just like never finding it. It's a movie I've watched 3 times now. I was more interested and more touched by it each time I watched it. And I think that Annie Baker, her background as a playwright, certainly comes into play here, because when you're a playwright and you're on stage, you really don't have much to work with. You have the details of your characters, and that's about it. And you could see that in her filmmaking. Not that she's not a good filmmaker. She's a very good filmmaker. But the details that she focuses on are things you could imagine being things that you would pick up when you're watching, a Broadway play. I believe she won the Pulitzer Prize, so it's not like she's without renown, and I can't wait to see what she does next. She's making another film with A24, so that's really awesome. I'm not sure any movie I saw this year identified with me quite the way that this movie did.
Well, that's a very respectable choice. I really love that you made that your number one. My number one is The Seed of the Sacred Fig.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. No, I love this film.
Filmed in secret in modern-day Iran, the film follows a family that's being tested by the control of the state and the societal unrest growing day by day in response to that control. I found it to be an absolutely super effective tale of systematic oppression that highlights the slow division and ultimate destruction of a family. And the family unit in this film is so brilliantly and realistically crafted with dynamic and complex characters. It showcases this generational divide of parents who are tied to tradition and their faith in the system and the state up against their daughters who are increasingly beginning to question and fight this oppression, what they're starting to realize as oppression. But it also shows how the slow evolution of these ideas can change the people who are subscribing to them. It's a very slow moving film, one where the details of day-to-day life compound into something more serious than I think any of these characters saw coming. But also, for a film that's made in a more oppressive society than our own, I also found it very relatable. These oppressive forces growing in our own country as we see bonds within our own families being tested over issues like immigration, women's bodily autonomy, racial justice, gay and trans rights, etc., etc. I just thought it was, of so many movies this year, such an important, necessary film for the times in which we live in. Just beautifully crafted, and I really loved it.
This is the darkest film that you've ever selected.
I think so.
As your number
yeah.
one. Because I'm thinking back, Past Lives. I think Mangrove. Marcel the Shell.
Marcel the Shell.
Yeah, you pick a lot of movies that are people go through things, but there's like a hope for humanity, and they're kind of, I guess there kind of is in this movie, but it's like
brutal.
It's like 3 hours of a pretty intense oppression,
and it gets more brutal as it goes.
Yeah, no, it's I like it. It's good. I think it's a good pick.
I didn't even think about it that way. It's maybe about my changing perspectives. I don't know.
It's definitely the most cynical movie you've ever picked as your number one.
I think it's a sign of the times for me.
As good as anything in my top 10, and I just didn't have room for it. But I think it's really cool that you picked this. I mean, this was a movie that we saw, I think we were told this story, but we saw it at like 9 o'clock, the New York Film Festival. It's nearly 3 hours long. We stayed for the director Q&A after. We were like exhausted, but it was very easy to stay awake for as a movie that was as good as this one. Like, it was just minute to minute, extremely intense and extremely well crafted. It was very impressive.
And that's it for our top 10 films of 2024. Let us know in the comments, what are your top 10 films of this year? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.